Ever imagine your real estate agent like involved in something way darker
Way
than
gorgeous.
just showing you houses?
Yeah.
We're going to dive into that unsettling possibility today.
Okay.
We've got excerpts from this Business Insider article, and it digs into some serious accusations against these big-name real estate brokers.
Yeah.
We're talking sex trafficking and harassment.
Heavy stuff.
Yeah.
And we'll definitely unpack all the specifics of those accusations, but we'll also kind of zoom out and look at the real estate industry itself.
Okay.
You know, its structure,
Right.
the culture,
Hmm.
any cracks in the system that might allow this kind of thing to happen.
Yeah, so let's start with the case that kind of blew the lid off this whole thing, the Alexander brothers.
Right. So you've got Orrin and Tal Alexander, the Alexander team.
Yeah.
These guys were luxury real estate brokers in New York City, and I mean luxury. In 2023 alone, they sold over $260 million worth of property.
Wow.
To put that in perspective.
That's a lot.
That's not just like a few fancy apartments. We're talking dozens of high-end deals, attracting some seriously wealthy clients.
So, like, how did things go so wrong?
Well, things took a dark turn.
Okay.
Prosecutors are accusing them of using their status to lure women to these events and parties
Uh-huh.
where they were then sexually assaulted.
Oh, wow.
And the accusations go even further. The indictment suggests this wasn't random,
Okay.
that there might have been drugs involved, even premeditation.
Really?
It paints a pretty disturbing picture.
So it wasn't just like a one-off kind of thing.
No, not at all.
Yeah, okay. And to make things even more complicated, you've got their third brother, Alon.
Right.
He worked for the family's security firm, and he is allegedly involved too.
It's a messy situation for sure,
Yeah.
but it's important to remember that the brothers completely deny all these allegations.
Right.
And the whole thing is still in the legal process.
Okay.
Their attorney, James Sink, has even said publicly that they're confident they'll be cleared.
So we'll have to wait and see what happens with that.
Absolutely.
But this case has definitely ignited a much bigger conversation
Oh, yeah.
about the real estate world in general.
Absolutely. Sue Yannicone, she's the president and CEO of Anywhere Brands.
Okay.
They manage these giant real estate companies like Century 21 and Coldwell Banker.
Right.
She said something that really struck me. She said, real estate, just like other industries, has to face these patterns of discrimination and harassment against women head on. Holding people accountable is a huge step forward, but there's still a lot of work to do in every sector to make sure women can thrive in safe, supportive, and fair environments.
Yeah, her words really highlight that we need to look at the whole industry,
The whole thing.
not just these individual cases.
Exactly.
And what jumps out at me is how decentralized real estate is, how much it relies on personality.
Yeah, you've got over 1.5 million agents in the U.S.,
Wow.
and a lot of them work as independent contractors.
Mm.
Their success hinges on being charismatic
Yeah.
and building those personal connections, which means there's less oversight than you'd find in like a typical corporate setup.
Right. And Brian Boaro, who co-founded this real estate branding and marketing company called 1000 Watt, he even called it the Wild West.
Interesting.
He pointed out how that lack of that traditional employee structure can open the door for unchecked behavior.
Yeah. What's fascinating is that Boro also made sure to say that the industry is full of all kinds of people.
Right.
You can't just lump everyone together.
Right.
There are tons of fantastic people in real estate,
Uh-huh.
but the system itself
Yeah.
might have these vulnerabilities that bad actors can exploit.
So if we think about those vulnerabilities.
Yeah, it leads us to a crucial question. How does the way the real estate industry is set up actually contribute to an environment where this kind of misconduct can not only occur,
Right.
but potentially go unnoticed for a long time?
Yeah, it does feel like kind of a perfect storm, right? You've
Yeah.
got this decentralized structure,
Yeah.
tons of money flying around, and often these close personal interactions between agents and clients,
For sure.
many of whom are incredibly wealthy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Think about the power dynamics in those situations,
Absolutely.
especially when agents are motivated to close deals no matter what.
Yeah.
And then factor in the role of social events and parties,
Right.
which are practically built into the industry's DNA.
Yeah, those parties are supposed to be about networking and relationship building.
Right, but they can easily blur the lines between professional and personal conduct.
Oh, for sure.
And when those lines get blurry, well, that's where things can get dangerous,
Yeah.
especially if someone's looking to take advantage of the situation.
Like the Alexander brothers case alleges.
Yeah.
Where those parties might have been used to lure victims.
Exactly.
It's unsettling to think about.
It really is. This whole situation forces us to ask some tough questions about how we create safer spaces in industries like this.
Absolutely. We've got to talk about these issues, and not just in real estate.
Yeah,
It's about power dynamics, accountability, and taking responsibility to make sure workplaces are safe for everyone.
for sure.
Okay, so we've laid out this pretty complex problem. So in part two, we're going to dive into some potential solutions, both at the industry level and for individual agents.
Sounds good. Let's do it.
All right, we'll be right back after a quick break.
So how do we even start to address this?
Well, it's a complex issue, no doubt.
Yeah.
But let's go back to that structure we talked about,
Okay.
that independent contractor status a lot of agents have.
Okay.
It means they're essentially running their own businesses,
Right.
which is great for flexibility,
Yeah.
but it also creates this gap in oversight.
Right. Because unlike a traditional company with employees,
Yes.
there's not always someone directly monitoring their actions or enforcing strict codes of conduct.
That's why some people are suggesting stricter background checks for all agents, regardless of whether they're part of a big firm or flying solo.
Okay.
It could help weed out individuals with a history of predatory behavior.
And it wouldn't just be about catching potential predators, right?
Yeah.
If agents knew these checks were in place,
Right. It might deter some from even considering these actions in the first place.
that's the idea. It's about prevention as much as it is about reaction.
Okay.
Another thing being discussed is mandatory ethics training.
Okay.
Right now, the requirements for getting a real estate license, they focus heavily on the financial and legal side of things. But ethics training
Yeah.
could address the nuances of power dynamics, professional boundaries,
Right.
and how to recognize and report potentially harmful situations.
And it could help agents understand their own responsibilities
Exactly.
in creating a safe environment, not just for clients, but for colleagues as well.
It's about the whole ecosystem,
Yeah. And we also can't underestimate the power of a good support system.
especially in such a competitive, high-pressure field.
Right.
It's easy to feel isolated or afraid to speak up, especially if you're worried about jeopardizing your career.
Absolutely.
Anonymous reporting systems could be a game changer here.
Okay.
If someone witnesses or experiences something inappropriate, they need a way to report it without fear of retaliation.
It's like those whistleblower hotlines you see in corporations, but adapted for the specific challenges of the real estate world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about empowering people to speak up and knowing their concerns will be taken seriously.
Okay, so who would be responsible for implementing something like that?
Well, that's where organizations like the National Association of Realtors come in.
Okay.
They have a huge influence on industry standards and practices.
Right, so they could play a key role in pushing for these changes,
Absolutely.
setting a strong example for individual brokerages and agents to follow.
Imagine if they made robust ethics training mandatory for all their members,
Okay.
or if they created a centralized platform for reporting misconduct anonymously.
That would send a powerful message
It would.
that this kind of behavior won't be tolerated and that the industry is committed to protecting everyone involved.
Yeah.
But even with all these potential solutions,
Wow.
there's still the culture itself.
Right.
That boys club mentality you mentioned earlier.
Right. And that's not something you can fix overnight with a new policy or a hotline.
Yeah.
It requires a fundamental shift in attitudes and behaviors.
And a recognition that this isn't just a women's issue.
Exactly.
It's about creating a professional environment where everyone feels respected, safe, and empowered to speak up regardless of gender.
You got it. And that's something everyone in the industry needs to be actively working towards.
So how do we get there?
Well, it starts from the top down. Leaders setting the tone, mentors guiding new agents and colleagues, holding each other accountable.
So coming back to the Alexander brothers case.
Yeah, their story, while still unfolding legally,
Mm.
has thrown this harsh spotlight on some uncomfortable truths about the real estate world.
Uh-huh.
And those truths extend far beyond just a few bad actors.
It forces us to grapple with the fact that even in an industry built on trust and personal relationships,
Right.
there can be a dark side.
There can be.
And it challenges us to ask these hard questions about how we create a real estate experience that is safe, ethical, and equitable for everyone. So we've talked about these huge systemic issues,
Yeah.
potential solutions,
Uh-huh.
but what about the individual? Where does personal responsibility fit into all of this?
Yeah, it feels like we've been focusing a lot on this big picture,
Yeah.
you know, the industry as a whole.
The system.
But what about the individual agent?
Right.
What can they do to make a difference, even if they're just one person
Right.
in this massive system?
That's a great question. And it's crucial because change ultimately happens at the individual level.
Yeah.
One thing agents can do is really kind of examine their own practices and behaviors.
Yeah.
Are they prioritizing their clients' safety and well-being above all else?
It's about being aware of those power dynamics we talked about,
Absolutely.
but making sure you're not taking advantage of a client's trust or vulnerability,
Yeah.
even unintentionally.
Even unintentionally. It's also about setting clear boundaries from the start.
Okay, how do you do that? Well, for example, being upfront about what services you provide, what kind of communication is appropriate, and what behavior is simply off limits.
Okay, and what if you see a colleague doing something questionable?
Yeah,
You don't just stay silent.
you don't stay silent. You speak up, even if it's uncomfortable.
So what does that look like?
It can be as simple as having a private conversation with that person,
Okay.
expressing your concerns or reminding them of the ethical standards expected of real estate professionals.
And if the situation is more serious,
Yeah.
or you don't feel comfortable addressing it directly,
Right. Then you report it through the proper channels.
so whether that's to their brokerage, a professional organization,
Yeah.
or even law enforcement, depending on the severity.
Exactly. Staying silent only perpetuates the problem.
This whole conversation has been pretty intense,
Indeed has.
but it feels important to be having it.
Yeah.
So let's try to wrap things up and summarize what we've learned from this deep dive into the real estate world.
Okay. We started with those shocking allegations against the Alexander brothers,
Right.
which led us down this path of exploring the real estate industry structure and how its decentralized nature, the huge sums of money involved, and a culture that sometimes blurs the lines between professional and personal can create opportunities for exploitation.
We discussed the urgent need for greater accountability within the industry.
Yes.
Safeguards like stricter background checks and mandatory ethics training, anonymous reporting systems to empower people to speak up, and a fundamental shift in the industry's culture away from that boys' club mentality.
We talked about a lot.
We did. But it's not just about systemic change. Individual agents have a responsibility to examine their own practices, set clear boundaries, and speak up when they see something wrong.
They do.
This situation raises questions that go way beyond real estate.
It does.
It's about power dynamics, ethical behavior, and creating a world where everyone feels safe and respected in their professional lives.
We've uncovered some disturbing truths, but we've also sparked a conversation that needs to happen. And what we each do with this information, how we choose to act, is what really matters.
So we'll leave you with this. Think about your own professional world. What changes, if any, do you think are needed to prevent similar situations from happening? It's a question worth thinking about because creating a safer, more equitable world starts with each of us. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.